had to mediate between two conflicting parties in the workplace. How would you iron out difficulties you were having with a colleague, or a client, or a supplier? Have you ever come up against an irreconcilable problem? What is the greatest difficulty you've had to overcome in your professional life? These questions all mean the same thing, and they all seem like questions we may be asked in any job interview. So it's very important that we are able to give very specific answers and very fluent and confident answers to these questions without too much hesitation, and of course keeping in mind the correct register and specific instances of where these problems occurred. But it goes without saying that in order to describe the measurable outcomes or the results of a problem that you solved, we need to be able to describe the nature of the problem itself. And describing the nature of the problem is half the problem solved. Today, we'll be talking about how to describe problems in C1 Advanced English Detail. Welcome to the Word of Mouth English Studio channel, where we discuss all things grammar, articulation and accuracy to help boost your output and input language skills and help give you the confidence you need to face your next adversary or perhaps a challenging situation in the workplace. We help with writing, speaking, listening, and also types of skills that you may need in the workplace. Today we'll talk about how to describe a problem. So let's get started. Let's start by defining the nature of a problem. Now, there are a myriad of ways in which we can describe problems in English, depending on whether you want to be formal, semi-formal, or informal in terms of your register. Here we have two popular English idioms used by my C1.3 and C2 proficiency users in class when describing the nature of a problem. Have a look at the two images here. Try to decipher which of the two belongs to one idiom and which belongs to the other. Well, to be in a pickle matches with the first image at the top, whereas a catch-22 situation with the bottom. But most of my B2 students tell me they've not ever encountered either of these idioms. We've never come across them before, we might have not heard them. So what do they mean? Well, a catch-22, or in the plural catch-22s or catch-22 situations, are a series of, or one, frustrating situation in which one is trapped by a contradictory regulation or a condition. It's what I would call an illogical or paradoxical dilemma that one needs to get out of. It's a condition, a regulation that prevents the resolution of a problem or a situation, and that's what we call a catch. A catch is a semi-formal or informal word for a problem or a dilemma or a situation from which there's no escape. Still confused? Well, a catch-22 is a problematic situation for which the only solution is denied by a circumstance inherent in the problem or inherent as part of a rule. A good example of this would be in show business. In show business, there's no work unless you have an agent, and there's no agent unless you've worked. So it's a catch-22. It's paradoxical. It's something you can't get out of easily. It could be a measure, a policy, whose effect is the opposite of what was intended. Or it could be a situation presenting two equally undesirable alternatives. Another example of a catch-22 would be a situation in which a graduate, fresh out of university, is desperate to find very stable work. But how is that possible when most companies require a minimum of 5 years work experience? Well, that's it. You want the job to get the experience, but you've got to have experience in order to get the job. Incidentally, did you know Catch-22 originated as the title of a 1961 novel by author Joseph Heller? Now here's the novel's Catch-22. A combat pilot was crazy by definition. Now, since Army regulations stipulated that insanity was justifications for grounding, a pilot could avoid flight duty by simply asking. But if he asked, he was demonstrating his sanity. Anyone who wanted to get out of combat must be sane. and had to keep flying. So this was something that he intended to get out of. As you may have noticed, the combat pilot was trying to get out of a seemingly disturbing or impossible situation in order to avoid another equally disturbing or impossible situation. So Catch-22 soon entered the English language as the standard for any irrational, circular, and impossible situation. And in the original satirical novel, the Catch-22 was a governmental loophole. The jar of pickles you see on the left, on the other hand, is symbolic for the idiom to be in a pickle, which in other words means to be in trouble or to be in a dangerous situation that you can't get out of. So again, it's very similar to, say, a Catch-22 situation. Oh, that's a Catch-22, or it's a little bit of a Catch-22 situation, or Mark seems to be in quite a pickle. How'll he get out of it? In today's video tutorial, I'll be sourcing some of my material from Lingoda. There are many ways to describe a problem in English, depending on how formal, semi-formal, or informal you want to be. But it's always important to assess your audience. What kind of register will they be expecting? If they're a group of experts in a field, then perhaps you might want to opt for a more formal style or register, whereas if your audience consists of the general public, then you might definitely need to go more informal or semi-formal. So, making use of idioms in your speech is very informal. That's the first rule of thumb for any professional. Raising an issue, on the other hand, is more technical. The new law raises an issue. If a problem goes unresolved, or a problem is unresolved, again, it's semi-formal and more technical. The problem went unresolved for years. If a problem arises, a problem crops up. Crops up is less formal, whereas arises is more semi-formal and technical. A problem arises when we look at both projects together. If a project you've been working on has clear shortcomings, then again, this is more formal or technical. This project has clear shortcomings. A shortcoming is another word for a problem. To place obstacles in someone's way is a more semi-formal approach of saying to create or cause difficulty for other members. This issue has placed so many obstacles in our way. How can you use these expressions in sentences of your own, in speaking or in writing? Think of email formats that you'd need to use them in, and think of presentations if that's part of your job description. Now, here are some expressions to do with difficulty. A foreseeable difficulty is something which you can foresee, which is why for always means before or pre. Right? So when you predict something, you can foresee that it might happen. There are some foreseeable difficulties which we should plan for. At the beginning of today's tutorial, I asked you whether you've had any insurmountable difficulties. The difficulties might prove insurmountable. An insurmountable problem is one that is difficult or almost seems impossible to achieve or solve. If you encounter difficulties, it means you face difficulties. We've encountered some difficulties, but nothing we can't get over. Again, to face difficulties is just slightly less formal, whereas experiencing them is more technical. The team is experiencing some difficulties at the moment. We'll be with you shortly. So think of how you could use them in your own job description. The difficulty lies in, so here we're talking about a location. Where is the difficulty? How can we pinpoint it? Where can we find it in spot checking? Right, so the difficulties lie in the supply chain, or the difficulties are in the supply chain would be a less formal, less technical, and more perhaps simplistic way to explain the same thing. But if your project or your job is fraught with difficulties, it may be time to reassess whether you're happy doing what you do. Because if something is fraught with difficulties, it's peppered with them, it is littered with them, or in other words, it's full of things that you can't solve. The project was fraught with difficulties from start to finish. Fraught with is the semi-formal phrasal verb in this case, and always goes with a pejorative noun such as problems, difficulties, or issues. In this section, we'll be focusing on the kinds of mistakes you're making. So, what kinds of mistakes have you made, or what kinds of errors do you want to relay? What kinds of errors are your partners making, and how can we explain them in more detail? Well, there are colossal mistakes, there are slight mistakes, and there are mistakes which should never happen but do. Which of these expressions on this slide refer to the bigger mistakes, the more crucial, critical ones, treacherous ones? That's right. So here are the biggest mistakes. A fundamental mistake is a colossal mistake. So is a monumental one. And if you're making lots of significant mistakes, that's not good for your company image. Then there are mistakes that are unavoidable. Unavoidable means the same as inevitable with IN, which is easier for my French students, my Italians, and my Spanish speakers to use. So inevitable but unavoidable. So avoid and evade are very similar, but inevitable and unavoidable have different prefixes in the negative. If a document or article is littered with mistakes, it doesn't look good. Okay, so it is peppered with mistakes, it is full of mistakes, but it is littered with mistakes. If you can acknowledge a mistake, that means you can admit to it, you can own up to what you did, or you could basically apologize. You are able to apologize. Not every professional I have met is able to do this. But it's important to be able to acknowledge one's mistakes so that we can move on. It shows maturity and responsibility and transparency. Now, you might say choosing to work for this company was all a mistake. Well, good luck with your next job search. And what is a deliberate mistake? This is something that is purposefully done. It is done with intent. Here are some sentences, including the collocations we've looked at, with the word mistake. He's made a monumental mistake. We had to fire him. It was a deliberate mistake. We certainly can't trust him. The piece is littered with mistakes. I'm sure no one checked it. You need to acknowledge the mistakes you made. Try answering these 6 questions. You should be able to answer these questions using the collocations with difficulty and mistakes that we covered earlier. Think back to your freshman years. Describe a mistake that you made at university, or perhaps at work. Say what the mistake was, why it happened, and how you fixed it. Now that we helped define the problem, let's try solving it. Here are some phrases we use to talk about solving problems. If you tried to rectify a mistake, you tried to overcome it, or you tried to resolve it. Use it like this. I think we can rectify the mistakes that were made. If you've tried to mediate between conflicting parties, it means you tried to act as mediator or problem solver for 2 people that didn't get along in the workplace. Perhaps they were colleagues or people from different departments. John is going to mediate between the conflicting parties. If you iron out difficulties, this is a phrasal verb that is used in a semi-formal or colloquial way to say, well, let's mend things, let's bridge the gap. I'm sure we can iron out these difficulties. Similarly, if you've tried to work around difficulties, you've tried to resolve them in the best way possible. We can work around these difficulties together. But if you have tried to do away with difficulties, it would mean exactly the same thing. You have tried to avoid them, to get those obstacles out of your way, as it were. Let's do away with these difficulties quickly. You're in a rush to get rid of them, right? And if you have successfully managed to overcome difficulties the project was fraught with, congratulations. Now, here are some collocations that include the word problem. To react to a problem. We deal with problems. Some problems are irreversible. Irreversible. You tackle problems, or in other words, you try to resolve them. We address problems, and again, that means we try to resolve them. If the problem takes up all your energy, it means you've consumed lots of energy having worked on this particular problem. Let's look into the crux of the problem. That means its origins, its foundations. Where does the problem lie? Remember that question? Finding out the crux of the problem is the origins of the problem, the foundations. Where did it all start? In other words, remember the question I asked you earlier today? Where does the problem lie? Here is a very good expression you could use when answering this question. The crux of the problem lay in ABC. If you've worked with people who've tried to alleviate problems, then you've got a very good team, because to alleviate means to get a load off your shoulders, to make the problem more manageable and more workable and easier to manage. Remember the expressions we used today and try using them in context. We should deal with this problem as soon as possible. The cash injection will certainly alleviate problems. We need to tackle this problem head on. The crux of the problem is that the law is very vague, and in many cases, red tape, or bureaucracy, could be the crux of many of your problems. I'll now leave you with some questions to ponder, which might not be of a work-related nature, but more of a personal one for you to consider. What would you do about these two problems? As additional written practice, you might want to complete the sentences below with ideas of your own to help you formulate sentences better and help you with your syntax and your word order. Also, put pen to paper today. Try to write a description of the mistake you talked about, whether it was a fundamental mistake or whether it was an accidental mistake, whether it was unintentional or whether it was unavoidable. Write a description of that mistake you talked about earlier to use some of the new phrases and collocations from today's lesson, and hopefully you'll be able to use them tomorrow. Thanks for sticking around until the end to watch today's video tutorial. We hope you enjoyed the content of this video, and if you did, as always, please remember to subscribe to the channel on the way out if you have not done so already, and give this video a thumbs up to show your appreciation, and of course to be able to view similar videos on the Word of Mouth English channel in future. Let us know what you like, what you enjoy in our content, and let us know what your particular problems are in English. We have helped thousands of professionals worldwide in the last 20 years of my career, and we would love to hear more from you on what the nature of your specific problem areas in English are in terms of language, in terms of business, in terms of style. Let us know in the comments below, and see you next time.